Have you ever looked at someone you once couldn't imagine living without and realized you no longer recognize them? The curve of their smile feels rehearsed now. Their stories sound like echoes from another lifetime. And somewhere between all the years and unspoken words, you stopped belonging to the same world. It doesn't happen suddenly. There's no grand farewell, no obvious fracture. One day, you're sharing secrets at midnight, and the next, you're sitting across from each other, trying to summon a closeness that no longer exists. You can feel it in the small silences, the kind that used to feel safe, but now hum with distance. The laughter that once came easy now feels like duty. The warmth of old friendship becomes memory more than reality. It's a strange grief, mourning someone who's still alive, mourning a connection that simply outlived its time. You watch them talk about things that no longer move you, and you nod, half out of love, half out of habit. And somewhere deep inside, you know you've grown into someone they can't reach anymore. Psychologists call it emotional divergence, when two people evolve in different directions because their values, experiences, and emotional needs no longer align. The brain, wired for familiarity, resists this drift. It wants to keep returning to what once felt safe. But growth changes the way your nervous system responds to people. The conversations that once calmed you may now exhaust you. The stories you used to relate to now feel like ghosts of a person you no longer are. It's not betrayal, it's biology. Your inner world expands, and suddenly, the container that once held you both feels too small. And yet, the guilt lingers. You wonder if you became cold, selfish, ungrateful. But maybe outgrowing people isn't cruelty. Maybe it's proof that you've kept becoming. You've learned things they haven't faced yet. You've suffered in ways they haven't had to. You've met parts of yourself that they've never seen. So you start to outgrow not the person, but the version of yourself that once needed them. Still, it hurts because love doesn't disappear when understanding does. It just transforms quietly. You begin to carry them differently, like a chapter you no longer reread but still refuse to erase. And that's what maturity really is, learning to love people without needing them to stay. You don't close the door in anger, you simply stop standing in the hallway, waiting for them to walk back through it. Maybe that's what growing up means, realizing that not every bond is meant to last a lifetime. Some are meant to teach you how to say goodbye without bitterness, how to cherish what was without craving its return. And in that quiet acceptance, you begin to see it growth is not loss, it's love evolving into silence. Think back to when you were a child, before you knew what identity even meant, before you had the language for loneliness. Back then, belonging wasn't just comfort, it was survival. You learned early that safety came from being understood, from fitting in, from mirroring the people around you. When your friend laughed, you laughed too. When they liked a song, you decided you liked it as well. It wasn't imitation, it was connection. You built yourself from the reflections in other people's eyes, hoping one day to see approval staring back. In psychology, this is the foundation of attachment. The human brain, even as early as infancy, is wired to seek closeness, to scan faces for signs of acceptance or rejection. The child who receives warmth and consistency grows with a steady rhythm in their nervous system, learning that the world is safe. But the child who feels unseen, who must earn affection through performance, learns another truth. To be loved, you must become what others want. So you keep shape-shifting, smiling when you're sad, pretending you're fine when you're breaking, and calling it friendship. Even as you grow older, those same survival patterns linger beneath the surface. You seek people who feel familiar, not because they're right for you, but because they echo the emotional climate of your past. Neuroscience calls it emotional homeostasis, the brain's tendency to recreate what it knows, even when it hurts. That's why chaos can feel like love, if that's what love looked like in your childhood home. That's why you forgive people who drain you, because once, that was how you kept someone from leaving. And so, you carry that child within you, the one who still believes that losing people means losing safety. You tell yourself you've matured, but deep down, every time a friendship fades, something primal panics. It's not just about the friend, it's about the echo of abandonment. You find yourself trying harder, holding tighter, over-explaining your worth, afraid that if you stop proving it, you'll vanish in their absence. But here lies the quiet tragedy: the child in you wants safety, while the adult in you longs for growth. One seeks comfort, the other seeks truth. And as you evolve, these two voices begin to clash. The friendships that once sheltered you start to feel like cages. You still love them, but you can't breathe inside them anymore. This is where the fracture begins, not out of malice, but out of evolution. Because every step toward who you're becoming requires leaving behind who you pretended to be. And sometimes, the people who loved that version of you can't follow. It's not rejection, it's divergence. And it all began with a child who just wanted to belong. At some point in your life, loyalty stops being love and starts becoming a quiet kind of death. You don't notice it at first, it disguises itself as kindness, as patience, as the noble act of being there. You smile, even when something inside you twists. You listen to stories that no longer stir you, nodding as if the rhythm of that old friendship still matches the pulse of your heart. You tell yourself, this is what good people do: they stay, they endure, they remember where they came from. But beneath that loyalty, there's a quiet betrayal unfolding, not of them, but of yourself. You wear what psychologists might call the mask of loyalty, a learned performance from childhood, a remnant of the belief that love must be maintained at all costs. The brain, shaped by years of attachment conditioning, doesn't distinguish between emotional safety and emotional stagnation. It simply wants to avoid rejection, so you adapt. You bite your tongue when opinions diverge. You laugh at jokes that now feel hollow. You dilute your truth so that no one feels uncomfortable drinking it. In doing so, you slowly shrink, molding yourself back into a version that no longer fits but feels familiar enough to pass unnoticed. It's a strange paradox, how easily self-abandonment can be mistaken for devotion. You convince yourself that your silence is maturity, that your restraint is grace. But in truth, you're carrying the ghost of the person you once were, the one who used to bend to survive. And each time you say, "it's fine," when it isn't, each time you swallow what should have been spoken, you're feeding that ghost, giving it new life inside a body that craves evolution. There's a moment, though a quiet, almost imperceptible one, when the mask begins to crack. Maybe it happens while you're sitting across from an old friend, realizing your laughter feels like an echo. Or perhaps during a conversation that should have felt warm but leaves you strangely empty. That's when it hits you. You've been performing a version of yourself you've already outgrown. Loyalty, once sacred, now feels like a chain. And yet, the guilt rushes in immediately. You wonder if letting go makes you cold. You fear becoming the person who changed. But perhaps change isn't betrayal, perhaps it's honesty. The truth is, not every connection survives your becoming, and that's not cruelty, it's nature. A tree cannot keep every leaf it grows. To hold on forever would mean to die under its own weight. So, you sit in that realization, the ache, the guilt, the faint relief, and understand that the cost of keeping peace has been your own authenticity. And as the mask begins to fall, you don't feel cruel. You feel free, because sometimes walking away isn't abandonment, it's finally walking toward yourself. Your brain doesn't want you to change, not really. It was never designed for transformation, only for survival. Deep inside your skull, beneath layers of logic and language, lives a system still ruled by ancient fears. The amygdala, that small almond-shaped sentinel, has only one mission: keep you safe. And to your brain, safe means familiar. It doesn't care whether that familiarity makes you happy, fulfilled, or free. It only cares that it's predictable, that it knows the contours of your pain. So, when you try to drift away from people who no longer align with you, your mind rebels. It whispers, "Don't do this. You'll be alone." The hippocampus floods you with memories of warmth and laughter, editing out the discomfort and silence. The body tightens, as if danger were near. The heart races not because you're in peril, but because your nervous system can't tell the difference between leaving a friendship and leaving a shelter. Evolution didn't prepare you for emotional growth. It prepared you for repetition. Psychologists call this the familiarity bias. It's the reason abused partners return to their abusers, why addicts relapse, and why you keep reaching for the friend who stopped seeing you years ago. The brain loves what it recognizes, even if it's killing you softly. Neuroscience shows that breaking old social patterns triggers the same neural pathways as physical pain. In fMRI studies, the brain regions that light up during heartbreak overlap with those activated when the body is wounded. The ache of loss isn't poetic, it's physiological. And so you rationalize, you convince yourself that staying connected is maturity, that time will fix the distance, that you owe them your loyalty. Cognitive dissonance, that psychological tug-of-war between who you are and who you pretend to be, fills the space between honesty and habit. Your mind begins to rewrite the story. Maybe I'm just busy. Maybe they do care. Maybe I'm imagining it. It's not weakness. It's the mind protecting its identity. Because identity itself is relational. It's built through faces, voices, names. When a relationship dies, part of your self-image dies with it. Social psychologists call this identity continuity. Humans crave it so deeply that the loss of connection can feel like social death, a kind of invisible extinction. To lose someone is to lose the mirror that once reflected who you were. And your brain will do anything to avoid that void, even if it means living in denial. But here's the haunting truth: your brain mistakes the past for safety, even when it's quietly suffocating you. It holds you in patterns you've outgrown, replaying comfort like a lullaby that now feels out of tune. Yet somewhere beneath the circuitry of fear, something ancient in you still stirs the part that knows growth has always required a death. And soon, you'll have to decide which one you're willing to let die, the past or yourself. There's a strange sadness that follows you when you start to grow. You don't talk about it often, but it lingers, a quiet, guilty ache that hums beneath your progress. You walk down the same street you once shared with old friends, and it doesn't feel the same anymore. The buildings are still there, the laughter still echoes faintly in memory, but the air feels different, thinner, quieter, like a ghost town where you left pieces of yourself behind. You wonder if it's them you miss, or the version of you that existed when they were around. This is the shadow side of growth, the grief that comes with evolution. You don't lose people because you stopped caring. You lose them because your paths no longer rhyme. And yet, every step forward feels like betrayal. The same empathy that once connected you now becomes your tormentor. You worry they'll think you've become cold, arrogant, detached. You replay the moments you didn't call back, the messages you left unanswered, and it feels like abandonment. You tell yourself you're busy, but deep down, you're haunted by the fear that your healing has made you cruel. Psychologists might call this survivor's guilt of emotional evolution. When your inner world changes faster than the people around you, your nervous system still registers their pain as your responsibility. It's an echo of attachment, that old wiring from childhood, where peace meant keeping everyone happy. The guilt isn't logical, it's primal. Your body still flinches at the idea of disappointing someone you once loved, even when love now means distance. So you compromise. You dim yourself a little when you're around them. You pretend to still laugh at the same stories, even when they no longer touch you. You shrink back into a smaller self, a familiar mask, just for their comfort. But afterward, there's a heaviness, a quiet knowing that you betrayed yourself to stay soft for someone else. This is the paradox of growth. You outgrow what once sustained you, And in doing so, you start to mourn your own kindness. Because that's what no one tells you, that healing can look like distance, and distance can feel like cruelty. You begin to question your humanity. Have you become heartless for protecting your peace? Have you grown so wise that you've forgotten how to love? But maybe this fear is just another illusion, the mind's last attempt to keep you tethered to the familiar. You haven't become cold, you've simply stopped burning yourself to keep others warm. The world will call it detachment, but it's really discernment, a deeper understanding of which connections feed you and which ones drain the life you're trying to build. And as you walk away from the ghosts of what was, the guilt will fade not suddenly but softly, until one day you realize that love was never about staying. It was about having the courage to keep walking, even when your heart still looks back. You've been told your whole life that a good friend never leaves. That real friendship means staying, no matter how much both of you change. Movies showed you the image of two people growing old together, still laughing about the same memories. Social media feeds you nostalgia montages of school days, wedding speeches, and perfect reunions. And somewhere deep inside, you believed it. You believed that loyalty meant permanence, and that walking away was proof of failure. But what if the truth is far less romantic and far more human? What if endurance is not always love but fear? You see, society builds myths around stability because instability frightens us. The collective story says that good people stay, that relationships which fade were somehow less real. We inherit this conditioning so early that we start confusing familiarity for morality. You cling to the people you've outgrown because it feels righteous, like keeping your word to the past. But what if that promise is the very thing suffocating your growth? Psychology calls this narrative identity, the need to see your life as a coherent story. When someone exits, that story breaks, and you mistake the discomfort for guilt. And yet, nature tells a different story. The tree that clings to every leaf cannot survive the winter. The ocean that never lets go of its waves would never find stillness. Even stars, those symbols of eternity, burn out to make room for new light. Why, then, do you believe your human heart must defy the same laws of renewal? You were not designed to stay static. Your psyche, like the world around you, grows through cycles of birth, decay, and rebirth. To outgrow someone isn't a crime against love. It's the very mechanism through which love evolves. But the myth runs deep. You fear being labelled disloyal. You fear the whisper that says you've changed, as if change itself were betrayal. So you stay too long, choking on memories that no longer nourish you. You keep relationships alive on life support, just so no one can accuse you of being heartless. But all the while, something inside you begins to starve. The self you are becoming cannot breathe in the air of the past, and yet you hesitate because leaving feels cruel. But maybe separation is love in disguise, the kind that respects growth enough to release what no longer fits. True loyalty isn't about staying unchanged, it's about not standing in the way of transformation. Society worships permanence because it's easier to film than to feel. But the truth is quieter, softer, like the moment a branch lets go of its last leaf. You can mourn the fall and still understand it's what allows spring to come again. And as you start to see it this way, you realize letting go isn't the end of friendship. It's the beginning of honesty, the kind that doesn't demand forever to prove it was real. There's a silence that follows growth, a silence that no one warns you about. It arrives after the goodbyes, after the quiet distancing, after the last conversation that felt like a wall instead of a bridge. You find yourself standing in a room that once felt alive with laughter, and now the air feels heavier, as if even memory has weight. The group chats grow still, the birthdays pass with fewer messages. The people who once felt like home now exist only in photographs and faint echoes. And you start to wonder, was becoming yourself worth the cost of walking alone? Psychologists describe this phase as liminality, the in-between state where the old self has dissolved, but the new one has not yet fully formed. It's a psychological cocoon, an emotional purgatory where everything familiar feels distant, yet the future still feels unreachable. You wake up and realize you've outgrown not just people, but entire versions of who you used to be. And this realization, this awareness of transformation, brings both clarity and grief, because growth, for all its beauty, is also a kind of death. Neuroscience tells us that the brain resists uncertainty. The prefrontal cortex, which seeks control, lights up in distress when old routines disappear. The mind associates isolation with danger because for most of human history, solitude meant vulnerability. So when you start walking alone, your body interprets it as loss, not progress. You feel it physically, the emptiness in your chest, the quiet anxiety before sleep, the ache of reaching for a name you no longer have permission to call. You tell yourself it's temporary, but the nights stretch long and nostalgia becomes a drug. You scroll through old photos, revisit old memories, trying to taste belonging again even if it's expired. But what you're experiencing isn't punishment, it's transition. The loneliness of evolving alone is not emptiness, it's expansion. The friendships that once held you belonged to an older vibration of your being. You no longer fit because you are no longer the same. The people who once mirrored you can't see you now. Not because they've stopped caring, but because your reflection has changed. You are now learning the language of solitude, the art of standing still in your own company, the quiet bravery of not rushing back to comfort. This is the loneliness of becoming. When you're too far from where you were, but not yet close to where you're going, it feels like exile, but it's initiation. Every soul that transforms must first pass through this wilderness, a sacred silence, where identity dissolves and something purer begins to take shape. So when the quiet feels unbearable, remember this: loneliness is not absence. It's the sound of your old self fading away, making room for the person you were always meant to become. And one day, this silence, the same one that once felt heavy, will start to sound like peace. Letting go isn't about cutting people out, it's about releasing your grip on what refuses to grow. But the mind doesn't understand that at first. It wants closure, apology, understanding. It wants to wrap the ending in reason so the heart can rest. Yet sometimes, there's no reason that satisfies the ache. You just wake up one day and realize you've been holding on to ghosts, people who live only in memory, versions of you that no longer exist. The hardest part isn't their absence. It's accepting that you can love someone deeply and still have to walk away. Psychology calls this individuation, the process of becoming whole without depending on the validation of others. Jung believed that every human carries both light and shadow, the parts we show and the parts we suppress to be loved. When you grow, those hidden parts begin to surface, and suddenly, you no longer fit the roles that once defined you. Letting go, then, isn't an act of cruelty, it's a quiet return to integrity. You stop pretending that proximity equals connection, or that loyalty should come at the cost of peace, and it's not a single decision. It's a practice, a daily unlearning of attachment without turning your heart to stone. You begin to set boundaries not to punish, but to protect the parts of you still tender. You might write letters you'll never send, not to reopen wounds, but to drain the silence that still bleeds between the lines. You might revisit old memories, not to relive them, but to thank them for shaping you. Detachment, in its truest form, isn't coldness, it's compassion without control. It's understanding that you can love someone and still let them exist outside your orbit. Neuroscience reminds us that the brain is plastic, capable of rewiring itself through intention. Every time you choose acceptance over resentment, you teach your nervous system a new rhythm. You stop chasing closure and start cultivating peace. You stop asking, "Why did this end?" and begin wondering, "What part of me is ready to begin again?" This is how healing quietly happens, not in grand gestures, but in small moments of surrender. In time, you realize that loss isn't the opposite of love, it's part of its design. Every person who leaves you teaches you a new form of it, some through presence, others through departure. You learn to wish people well without needing to stay connected. You learn that forgiveness isn't reunion, it's release. And in that realization, you become softer, not harder. You understand that love was never meant to be carried like a weight, only shared like a flame. You don't have to carry every soul you meet. Some are meant to awaken you, some to wound you, and some simply to remind you that your heart was built to let go and still remain open. There comes a point in your life where you stop waiting for people to catch up. You look around, and the faces that once defined your world have faded into a softer distance. It doesn't happen in anger, it happens in stillness, in the quiet realization that not everyone is meant to walk with you into every chapter. You used to think growth was about addition, more friends, more love, more belonging. But with time, you learn that growth is often subtraction, the peeling away of everything that no longer feels alive. You start to walk alone, and at first, it terrifies you. The silence feels like exile. The roads ahead look endless. But slowly, something shifts. The quiet stops feeling empty and starts feeling sacred. You begin to hear your own footsteps again. You begin to meet yourself without distraction, the self that existed before the noise, before the expectations, before the need to be understood. And in that solitude, you discover the truth. Growth is not cruelty, and solitude is not punishment. It's initiation. Philosophers have long said that individuation, the journey toward the self, is a kind of death and rebirth. Jung called it the path of integration, where you gather all the parts of yourself you once hid to be loved. It's not easy. The human brain, shaped by millions of years of social wiring, still fears isolation. The amygdala interprets aloneness as danger. But what if this ancient fear is no longer accurate? What if walking alone is no longer a threat, but a doorway? Imagine yourself as a traveler moving through a landscape of memory. Behind you, the villages of your past still glow faintly. Laughter, faces, voices that once carried you. Ahead, the horizon blushes with light. You carry no one now, except your shadow, the silent companion that has witnessed every loss and every becoming. And for the first time, it feels enough. You begin to understand that love doesn't vanish when distance appears. It transforms from attachment into gratitude, from possession into peace. You no longer chase connection, you embody it. You no longer beg for understanding, you extend it. The people you outgrew are not mistakes, they are completed lessons. And those who outgrew you are not villains, they are mirrors that no longer reflect your current form. Because the truth is, we are all travelers in constant motion, meeting, learning, parting, evolving. The tragedy isn't that we outgrow others, it's that we fear doing so. But the soul was never meant to stay small, just to fit a familiar embrace. You will outgrow people, and they will outgrow you. The real art of living is learning to love without needing to hold. To bless what was, release what is, and walk onward, carrying only the wisdom of what you've lived through, and the quiet strength of a heart that dares to keep opening.